Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I associate myself with the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks about the tragic air crash in India and, of course, what she said about our dear colleagues Joe Cox and Sir David Amess. I also join her in calling for de-escalation between Israel and Iran, while noting everything possible must be done to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon. Yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition and I met with survivors and family members of the rape gang scandal. Fiona, Teresa, Lucia and Marlon. They told us how authorities deliberately covered up the systematic rape of young girls and some boys by gangs of predominantly Pakistani heritage men. They covered it up because they cared more about so-called community relations than about protecting vulnerable girls. That is disgusting. The survivors told us they will only have confidence in an inquiry if it is independently led, has full statutory powers, covers all 50 towns affected, including Bradford, if those who covered this up are prosecuted, if foreign perpetrators are all deported, if survivors are closely involved, and if it is set up before the summer recess. Can the Deputy Prime Minister give the survivors and their families those assurances?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I thank him for his tone and putting the survivors and victims at the heart of his question here today. I think it's absolutely right that we all look at what's happened over the last couple of decades, the countless reports that we've had, and we look to implement that. He's absolutely right to also talk about the confidence people must have in that independent inquiry. And the member that my friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, spoke about that earlier this week in regards to Baroness Casey's report. So we will take that forward at speed, Mr. Speaker. It will be independent, it will have statutory powers, and we will implement the J report, which was he will have known about as the Shadow Minister in the Minister in charge at the time, and we'll get on with taking the action. I hope members of his party will take his tone in making sure the whole House put the victims first and we all work together to get to the bottom of it.
Well, I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for her answer. It is vital that scandals like this are never again covered up because of the racial background of perpetrators. And Baroness Casey's report said people who downplay the ethnic dimension are letting victims down, to use her words. So I do have to raise the language the Prime Minister used in January when he, I'm afraid to say, smeared campaigners as jumping on, quotes, a far-right bandwagon, simply for calling for the very inquiry he has now been forced to set up. Standing up for rape victims is not far-right. So will the Deputy Prime Minister apologise for what the Prime Minister said?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I say, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister did not just raise issues but acted on them. He brought the first prosecutions against grooming gangs, called for action to address ethnicity issues in 2012. And the honourable member will know that the data that the previous government collected was inaccurate and not complete. And Casey recognised this, and it's one of the recommendations that we will be taking forward. The Prime Minister made those comments specifically about Tory ministers who sat for years in the government and did absolutely nothing about this scandal.
Smearing campaigners, standing up for rape victims as far right is completely unacceptable, and the Prime Minister should never have said that. And I commend his predecessor, the member for Richmond, for the grooming gangs task force he set up, which led to 550 arrests in its first year. Now, Baroness Casey's report also said that a significant number of rape gang perpetrators were non-UK nationals or were asylum seekers, many of whom entered the country illegally. And we know, of course, that most illegal immigrants crossing the Channel are young men, contrary to what the Chief Secretary said last week. So does the Deputy Prime Minister now accept that the small boats crisis is a crisis of public safety as well as a border crisis?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious issue and more needs to be done. And let me update the House. Working with our allies, we've carried out a series of major arrests to tackle smuggling gangs behind this vile trade. In the past month, a ringleader that smuggled almost 4,000 migrants has been jailed for 25 years. We could go further thanks to the law enforcement agreements we've struck with Germany, Italy, Serbia and the Balkan states. In stark contrast to the honourable gentleman, he was the man at the heart of the Home Office when immigration soared, we lost control of our borders and spent £700 million of taxpayers' money on persuading just 4 volunteers to be removed from Rwanda. I take no lectures.
If she wants to find out who's lost control of our borders, I suggest she looks to her immediate right. Because ever since the Home Secretary scrapped the Rwanda deterrent before it even started, illegal immigration across the Channel has gone up by over 30%. And so far this year, 2025 has been the worst year in history for illegal immigrants crossing the Channel. That is on her watch. That is down to her government. The Prime Minister is now planning crisis talks with President Macron, finally admitting, in his own words, that the situation is deteriorating. The government's laughable plan to smash the gangs lies in tatters. So will she now at last accept we need a removals deterrent so every single illegal immigrant arriving on these shores is immediately removed? Will she commit to that, yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, if they want to argue that 40,000 arrivals since July 24 are down to the scrapping of the Rwanda scheme, they need to explain why there were more than 43,000 arrivals in the same period starting in July 22 when the Rwanda agreement was in place. It's absolute rubbish, Mr Speaker. They lost control of our borders. We're getting control of our borders. He needs to apologise.
I don't see how she has the brass neck to claim she's got it under control. When the numbers crossing the Channel this year are the highest in history. She asks about the Rwanda deterrent. I'll repeat, she obviously wasn't listening to what I said earlier. The Rwanda scheme never started. And indeed illegal immigrants in Calais said they were...
Order! Order! Just do it. I want to hear the question, and I'm sure our constituents want to hear the question and the answer. Crystal.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Rwanda scheme never started. Illegal immigrants in Calais were saying before the election how much they wanted the Prime Minister to get elected because he would help them get here. When Australia started a similar scheme about 10 years ago, it worked within a few months. Now, Mr Speaker, as a consequence of the government losing control, they are now accommodating growing numbers of illegal immigrants, many of whom cross the Channel, in asylum, hotels and flats. The Home Office's suppliers are now actively offering above-market deals to landlords to get hold of their properties to be used for illegal immigrants. In the meantime, hard-pressed young people here are unable to rent or buy. So why is this government prioritising housing for illegal immigrants above housing for our young people?
So again, Mr Speaker, I gently say to the right honourable member opposite that under their watch, immigration increased fourfold until it reached almost 1 million in a single year. They also created the backlog, 400 hotels, which we've reduced to just over 200 hotels in the first 12 months of us being in government, Mr Speaker. £1 million a day spiffed up the wall because they were so incompetent. We're building the homes that they failed to deliver over 14 years of consecutive failure by their government. They should apologise while we get on with the job of rebuilding Britain.
Chris Philp.
Goodness me, she's got a cheek. Housing starts in Q4 last year went down. Her mission to rebuild Britain is not going very well. She talks about asylum hotels. She obviously hasn't looked at the most recent numbers. The number of people in asylum hotels was higher in March this year than it was at the time of the last election. And she gave no answer about the priority being given to illegal immigrants over people living here already. Now, Mr Speaker, a Zimbabwean paedophile due for deportation was recently allowed to stay in the UK because a court found he might face, quote, some hostility back in Zimbabwe, apparently breaching his Article 3 rights. What about the rights of children here to be protected from this dangerous paedophile? Who's looking out for their rights? Not the government. There are thousands of cases like this involving foreign criminals. So there is a solution. We need to scrap the Human Rights Act for immigration matters so this sovereign parliament decides on the law our courts apply. But her party voted against that. So I have a simple question. Why did the government side with foreign criminals and not the British public?